Cheryl. Talofa lava, as Cheryl said, my name's Julia. I always get a bit awkward when people start listing off things that I've done, or I hear the word expert being thrown about, because I'm like, oh, am I as well, really? Thank you all for being here, for making time for this call. I suppose the first thing I want to do is just explain what People for People is and where it was born. So People for People is a social enterprise that's led by Pacific Youth, myself and my co-founder, who Sue knows very well, Sai Mataele, who's also on the a board member at 2020 Trust as well. We really wanted to create something that was purpose-built by us, for us, and led from a space of community rather than from a space of those that are coming from it from either an industry perspective or from a government perspective, or just sort of leading more into having the cultural values and the cultural responses be deeply embedded in what we've built. So we are a social enterprise that is on a mission to strengthen digital empowerment. And one of the things that really brought to light digital equity for me was actually moving into the industry as a young Pacific woman and working for HP in London and in the US. One of the things I started to recognize really early on in my career is that those that are most at risk of being left behind are often those that don't actually know that. And that to me isn't fair. It's not fair, it's not right, and the thing that rattled me the most was that it was going to be my community. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about that in two areas. One is from being digital ready, so digital literacy and digital skills, and the other is from a human displacement standpoint from the industry at large. So the rate of technological change is moving at like almost at a Moore's law level, where it's doubling every year in terms of size and in terms of speed. Now, that is terrifying, and that is not slowing down. And it is almost like it's a tsunami that's going to hit a set of communities that don't even know there were waves in the first place. And again, going back to what Sue mentioned, there's a huge element of fairness to me that doesn't sit right. And that's where myself and my co-founder, a lot of what we're trying to do is take our communities on an education journey. And when I talk about that, I'm really talking about that from, you know, we hear about connectivity and we hear about accessibility from an infrastructure standpoint and from a hardware standpoint. But also what I seem to notice is, and like the amazing woman before me mentioned, the gaps in data are across the board. So when we're talking about the divide, we actually aren't always talking about it from those that are sitting on the divide. And the sample sizes of the data that exist is very small. And that to me is starting to create quite a gap in understanding of what are the complex systems in which our communities are sitting within. And how are we missing that when we're creating these solutions and when this topic is very popular, which is very important, and I think that's brilliant. But as we're kind of having these quick fire solutions, where are we missing our understanding of the complexity that's actually a lived experience? And that's where ourselves as People for People, which again is people championing people to ensure that no one is left behind, and hence why the title expert doesn't really fit right, because I'm like, I'm just a people, is really trying to lift the voices from lived experiences and fill those knowledge gaps so that solutions can be culturally responsive and be set in ideals and practices and a deep knowledge of how we can shift our communities forward with technology and for those not to be left behind. Because as we already highlighted, is that the digital divide is just the divide. You know, it's just the divide that's now become a deep gully and a deep crevasse that will not be bridged without more being done. And some of the ways that we're looking at that is we're targeting the 18 to 40-year-olds, and the reason why we're doing that is from their digital ready and also from the human displacement. Those are those that are going to miss out or otherwise lose their roles due to the rate of technological change. And the other pieces that we're looking at is Māori and Pacific communities in particular, where we want to look after our cousins and we're looking after our own communities ourselves, and creating those culturally responsive solutions and shifting into understanding how do you support cultural identity online? How do you take solutions into places like the church? How do you actually, you know, part of the mindset around employment pathways is that the decisions don't always sit with the student. They sit with whānau. They sit with the parents, the aunties and uncles. They're the ones that are deciding where our young people are moving themselves into. And the other piece of the puzzle that we're really trying to tackle is being a bridge between industry and community. And I'm going to share some quite upsetting facts about technology leaders that I've heard since I've moved back home. And these are from quite major tech leaders who have literally said to me on a phone saying, I don't believe there is a divide in technology. I can walk down the road and buy a $362 Chromebook and I'm involved. So I don't understand what the problem is. And these are like multi-million-dollar influencers in the industry. So much of what we're also trying to do is break down structural racism, institutional racism, and cultural bias against our communities and discrimination against our communities. And that's something that I don't think New Zealand is necessarily willing to recognize, the fact that we have this at play. And that's part of also the reason why our diversity stats within the industry are as low as 2% and 5% of Māori or Pacific that actually are occupying this industry. And that's not okay. And I think so much of what we're trying to do, and having come from industry is try and come from community, is try and find how can we develop those bridges, how can we deconstruct institutional racism in the industry so that it's a safe place to bring forward our communities into from an employment pathway and wealth creation standpoint. So there's a little bit of reconstruction and reconnecting our communities into the digital world, into culture and into understanding the space, and also a deconstruction from an industry standpoint of ensuring that these spaces and places are safe for our young people and our communities to be moving into. So that's a bit of a highlight reel, and I'll drop our website in the chat as well. So that's where we're at on this one.